Veterinary Anatomy in Practice. I'm Corinna, and joining me today is Professor Peter Irwin, a veterinarian whose distinguished career includes specialist practice in canine medicine, world-renowned research in tick biology and vector-borne disease, and leadership as Dean of the Vet School at Murdoch University in Perth, Australia. I'm very excited and grateful that Peter is joining us today to give his perspectives on applied anatomy. Welcome and thank you, Peter.
Thank you very much, Corinna. Wonderful to be here.
Peter, with such a diverse and rich career to your name, can you still actually recall what it was like to first learn anatomy back at the Royal Veterinary College in London?
I sure can. I sure can. It was at the RVC, as you say, which is in Camden Town in North London. And it's a fairly grim place. It's a sort of grim part of London, Royal College Street. The building itself is quite a daunting old building, a Victorian building. And yes, that's where we spent our first 3 years of the veterinary course. And the anatomy laboratories were way down in the basement of this building. And it was quite a formidable and daunting place. I think anatomy was taught very differently back then. It was sort of very traditional. Really, I fear, very uninspiring. And perhaps we'll talk later about, how it is so important to make veterinary anatomy relevant to the students. And I remember, rote learning things, muscle insertions and origins, and it just, without really knowing why. The other thing is we were taught only dog anatomy in terms of companion animals, or at least small companion animals. We were only taught about dogs, very, very little about cats. And yes, it was a somewhat grim experience. It was lightened considerably, by student banter, of course. And we had this wonderful expression. Well, the small dissection guide by Delahunter.
Very much.
And then there's the large book, The Anatomy of the Dog, which we used to call Big Miller. I don't know, perhaps everyone calls it Big Miller around the world, but we used to laugh. We'd go back to our hall of residence with Big Miller to study up for the next day. But I remember those experiences well at the RVC. But I'd like to think that things have improved considerably in the teaching of anatomy since those days.
And that leads me nicely into my next question. So, with your perspective now as an experienced practitioner and former dean, what would you say are the features of a good anatomy curriculum, and how is that best integrated into the overall veterinary program to produce confident and resourceful and resilient veterinary graduates, and also to develop those day one competencies?
Sure. Well, I can really only speak authoritatively about teaching of small animal anatomy, but several things come to mind with this question. The first is, as I mentioned earlier, I wasn't taught any feline anatomy, and yet cats make up such a large and such an important part of small animal practice. So having feline anatomy, which is different in many ways from dogs, included into the curriculum, that's important, I think. But then, of course, the whole issue of vertical integration is really critical, I think, for students to be able to understand what it's all about. Why are they really learning these things? I mean, I think any vet student knows that they have to learn anatomy, but to be able to focus and tailor the teaching, predominantly to items of anatomy that are clinically relevant, with the inclusion of different disciplines to bring relevance. So for example, having surgeons and having radiologists coming into the anatomy room and talking about why certain aspects of anatomy are important in the clinical field, that is then picked up in second year, third year, and even actually, I mean, really good integration involves anatomists being involved in later years as well. I don't think that happens so often, but essentially this idea of not teaching anatomy in isolation, whereas thinking back to the RVC, um, I was taught anatomy, and then that was it. You passed the anatomy exams, that was anatomy gone. In fact, students often sold their anatomy books at the end of second year. Um, I I'm afraid I was one of those. My Big Miller, I said goodbye to Big Miller, but I think that's a problem, because the anatomy really does need to be made relevant and to be kept in front of mind all the way through.